The golden era of superheroes in the MCU is almost coming to an end with the release of Spider-Man: Far From Home. Endgame brought together all our beloved superhero storylines, and yet managed to leave some questions looming about the plot. Marvel has taken the visual effects, Easter egg planting, drama and humor to the next level. Infinity War is definitely one of my favorite parts of the ongoing Marvel saga for two important reasons. At the end, it seemed like the villain had won, and our heroes, the Avengers, had lost the battle. Not exactly typical for superhero movies, and quite a surprise. The questions we all had by the end of the movie didn't revolve around the plot holes, just speculation about what would happen next, as we already knew that there would be a grand finale explaining it all. While Endgame made a huge impression on me, I hope it did the same for you as well. But I can't turn a blind eye to some little small tiny inconsistencies. Hi, it's Peter here, and today we'll try and find some answers to Endgame's biggest plot holes. So very obviously, there'll be plenty of spoilers ahead. Let's start with the plot hole that forms the core of the movie, Doctor Strange's irrational plan.
How many did we win? One.
As Strange told Stark in Infinity War, we know that the Avengers only had one good chance of winning out of 14,605 different versions of the battle with Thanos. The whole of Endgame is based on the possibility of traveling through the quantum realm, but that could only happen if Ant-Man Scott Lang was back with the Avengers. The problem is, his return was due to a random act of chance. Now, I'm not an expert on probability theory, but even I can imagine there could be a hell of a lot of different events influencing the behavior of a rat. This small furry friend, the true savior of the Avengers, had to run over a button to bring Scott back from the quantum realm. But what if it had hit a mousetrap or left there by the storehouse owner? Or maybe the van could have been scrapped by looters. I mean, it's almost a post-apocalyptic world where millions of houses are abandoned. Of course, there have to be burglars taking advantage of the situation, so the chances that the rat would hit the right button were a little bit more than 50-50. It means that Doctor Strange took a gamble on the fate of the entire world and placed his bets on a rodent? Even the Russo brothers themselves admitted that, among the many realities in those 14 million possible futures Doctor Strange foresaw, the mouse failed to press the button, and thus the heroes failed in those futures. Well, at least we can see why they didn't choose a bird or a cat to save the Marvel Universe, but a little rodent.
Perhaps a reference to the MCU's owners, Disney?
And so, that's why I can say objectively that the rat should have been the one to receive Cap's shield. Speaking of which, let's move on to the ending scene and Captain America's strange return. Well, you can call me a total nag and a killjoy complaining about Cap's illogical return, or rejoice over a complete character arc and him finally living the happy life with Peggy that he deserved. The choice is yours. Now, I love Cap, but picking up plot holes is fun, so I'll just go for it. The time travel in Endgame is nothing like Back to the Future. And the grandfather paradox, you know, the one where you kill your ancestor in the past and therefore you vanish from your present time? Yeah, that doesn't work here either. Instead, alternative timelines are created. While Steve Rogers technically went back to the past, it was a different timeline. So why did he return as an old version of himself, sitting on a bench at the end? Well, if you think about the multiverse a bit more, that means that the Captain America from our timeline lived alongside the Cap from an alternate universe. We saw him meeting America's ass when the Avengers traveled into another timeline. So the same thing should have happened when he traveled back to his beloved Peggy. Well, there's no problem with him bringing back the shield to pass on to Falcon. I mean, it's an alternate timeline after all, where Thanos probably didn't destroy Cap's symbolic shield. In fact, maybe there wasn't even a Thanos in that universe at all. And there's no problem with Captain America returning to the bench and not the time travel machine. He had that time traveling band, and according to the time travel rules of the past, Cap could have chosen any time and any location to return to. Steve knew the date that he had to travel back to, so he probably waited for his launch to already happen in our universe, thus becoming a past event, and used his bracelet to come to us. Now, what I personally don't get is, how did two Captain Americas coexist in that parallel timeline? How did Steve and Peggy meet each other in the first place if there was already another Cap there? Maybe he kept his alternative version in a closet for all those years so he could live happily with Carter. Or did he go back to the point when his other self was frozen in the ice? So did he just let him stay there? Since he lived a normal life with Peggy, he didn't become the hero that we know. He couldn't tell anyone where the other Steve Rogers was trapped. Does this mean he just let all those terrors just happen to people? Like, sorry you were captured and tortured by Russians, Bucky, but I've got to umpire my kid's baseball game. Never mind S.H.I.E.L.D. being riddled with Hydra agents, me and Peggy have a hot night of swing dancing to get to. Doesn't sound very logical, right? Moreover, doesn't exactly sound like the Cap that we know and love. I guess we've got to see how logic weighs up against a satisfying character arc. Let me know in the comments which one matters more to you personally. Take your time thinking about that though, as we now have to move on to Scott Lang and the mystery of Pym particle storage. The Avengers were pretty specific about the number of particles given to each person on the team, just enough for them to make leaps to the past and back to the present. So while the team were trying to obtain the Tesseract, Scott used one more vial to shrink down and damage Stark's arc reactor. Then, when Thanos attacks the Avengers, Ant-Man used a vial once again to survive the explosion. And he also had a set of Pym particles to turn himself into Giant Man. Does that mean the arthropod Avenger didn't tell his friends he had more particles just in case they failed? If only Hulk had known that when he gave Scott the taco he didn't deserve. And hey, there's one more particular detail about Steve that I almost forgot, about the Tesseract. The Tesseract acts as a kind of container for the Space Stone. I assume the Avenger had to break it just like Thanos did in order to place the stone in Stark's homemade Infinity Gauntlet after the time leap. So how could Steve Rogers have returned the Space Stone? Does that mean there are parallel universes that don't contain the Tesseract? While the Tesseract doesn't bring much luck to its owners, maybe the Space Stone on its own is a bit less unfortunate. Okay, since we've started talking about the Infinity Stones, there's one more obvious question that I'm sure you're all asking. What about using the Time Stone to resurrect Tony Stark? It's clear why our heroes couldn't resurrect Natasha, as she selflessly traded her life for the Soul Stone. Plus, that happened in a parallel universe, so that likely makes things a bit more complicated. As Hulk said, he tried to imagine her when he snapped, but that simply didn't help. There's the explanation that Thor or Hulk could have died if they used the Infinity Gauntlet once again. It almost killed Banner the first time after all. The thing is, they didn't have to use the whole gauntlet. Doctor Strange could have used the Time Stone, but that potentially would have affected the outcome of the war and brought Thanos back. As the Doctor said, there really was only one scenario for victory, and let's be honest, Tony's character arc has come to an end. His watch is over. He is a Stark after all. But here's a good example of a plot hole that can't be explained so easily. I am talking, of course, about Stormbreaker. In Avengers Infinity War, we clearly saw the Axe Hammer ward off the blast of all 6 Infinity Stones, and it remained undamaged. Even the Dwarf King Eitri, who created it, admitted it was the strongest weapon the dwarves had ever created for Asgard, because it was designed to kill Thanos. Though Thor failed to do so, it had nothing to do with Stormbreaker itself, and more to do with Thor's inability to exact his revenge properly. Or maybe his depth perception was a bit off, owing to his new eye. As Thanos said,
"You should have gone for the head."
But in Endgame, we saw that Thanos easily withstood the force of Stormbreaker with just his sword. Seems like the Stormbreaker works only when it's convenient for the plot. I get that the writers couldn't make the fight scene 30 seconds long, and who could deny the powerful and emotional moment when Cap wielded Thor's Mjolnir? But that's kind of reminiscent of those classic blockbuster scenes where the bad guys can't hit the side of a barn door, or a gun randomly jams when it's convenient for the good guys. For proof of this principle in action, take a look at the deadly accuracy of the stormtroopers shooting when it's a Solo or a Skywalker in their sights. But let's move past Tony's snap and move closer towards the climax of the movie. Isn't it weird that we saw Peter Parker's classmates and friends all coming back at the same time? It was what, like 5 years since the snap? Anyone who remained undusted should have grown up a bit, right? So it's pretty convenient that all of Peter's friends specifically were erased by Thanos so that there wouldn't be an age difference in the upcoming Spider-Man movies. Not so random, fair, and perfectly balanced there, eh, Thanos? Even if we let that pass, we can't ignore the age difference for some other people in the MCU. While it's technically not a plot hole, imagine if Marvel addressed this issue. A story about people getting back to their normal lives after the resurrection snap would be a fantastic, dramatic, Oscar-worthy scenario. Imagine you came back to your girlfriend or boyfriend, but they've already moved on. They're dating other people, loving them, or even already married. Or even worse, a Game of Thrones level creepy scenario in which the 14-year-old minors are still in love with their romantic partners from high school, but they'd now be 19-year-old college students at the time of their return. That means not only losing lovers, but even close friends who might have graduated and found other interests. People returning to their old, collapsed and robbed homes, or parents coming back and looking for newborn babies that they left after the snap. And that's not to mention all the pets. I mean, think of what happened to Fry in Futurama and his dog Seymour in the classic episode, Jurassic Park. Now multiply that by about, 900 million? So creepy and so devastating. Ugh. Right, now let's talk about less disturbing things. Since we're talking about plot holes here, let's get back to the topic of alternative timelines and cover one that could have happened in the alternate MCU world. Here's Catherine Langford. If you haven't seen 13 Reasons Why on Netflix, you probably have no idea who she is. If so, you'll probably be surprised to find out that Catherine acted in Endgame. And no, you didn't miss her scene, it was just cut. That didn't result in a plot hole per se, but it probably could have been pretty confusing if they'd left it in the movie. Catherine was cast to play the teenage version of Stark's daughter Morgan. The Russo brothers filmed a short scene right after Tony's snap where he meets his adult daughter that was pretty reminiscent of the scene with Thanos and little Gamora. However, when the Endgame directors showed the scene to test audiences, they couldn't handle it. The audience was really confused and simply just didn't get what was going on. As the Russo brothers said, what we realized about it was that we didn't feel an emotional association with the adult version of his daughter. So it's probably for the best that it didn't end up on the big screen. All in all, whatever I say, we all love Endgame for its humor and bittersweet goodbyes, where we got to say farewell to some of the characters whose antics we've watched and enjoyed for over a decade. Exhausted as I may be, this list is in no way exhaustive. Head down to the comments and let me know about all the other plot holes you've found, or tell me why I'm dead wrong and there's an explanation for all this convoluted madness. And I'd love to know what other solutions you came up with to explain Endgame's mind-melting temporal plot holes. Thanks for watching. Love you 3000.